Tonight, we are traveling back more than 250 million years to a time when the land was recognizably Earth, but ruled by lives that no longer exist. This was a world shaped by creatures whose stories are rarely told. Long before dinosaurs ever appeared, the land belonged to predators that don't fit neatly into anything we know today. Some carried tall sails stretched along their backs, structures so rare that evolution has almost never repeated them. Others had broad skulls and powerful jaws, built for a harsh world where survival demanded strength and patience. These animals were not dinosaurs, and they were not modern reptiles, but something older and stranger, standing at a crossroads of evolution. They lived during a time when the continents were fusing into one vast landmass, reshaping the Earth itself. The interior grew hot and dry, seasons became unreliable, and survival favored bodies that could endure extremes. Their forms feel experimental, as if nature itself was testing boundaries. Limbs that hint at mammals, jaws that echo reptiles, skulls with no living equivalents. But how did such bizarre predators come to dominate the planet for tens of millions of years? What kind of world allows forms so extreme to not only survive but rule? How did Earth's first true land apex predators reshape life around them, and why did none of them survive what came next? Tonight, we drift into that forgotten age when the land itself seemed to favor monsters built from trial and excess. But before we begin, if you enjoy videos like this, slow, soothing, and quietly filled with wonder, I'd love it if you gave this one a like and maybe tapped subscribe. It helps more curious minds like you find their way to this peaceful little corner of the internet. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight, and what time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. Now take a deep breath, close your eyes, let your shoulders soften, and together let's step softly into the lost age of the strange rulers who came before dinosaurs. The Permian period began quietly, without ceremony, unfolding after earlier ages had already shaped land and life into something recognizable but incomplete. It stretched for nearly 50 million years, long enough for entire worlds to rise, settle into rhythm, and harden into something unforgiving. Time in the Permian moved slowly, measured not in moments, but in the steady pressure of heat, drought, and survival. What had once been scattered continents drifted closer together, closing oceans, sealing coastlines, and drawing the surface of the planet into a single immense landmass. This slow collision reshaped everything that lived upon it. As the continents merged, Earth became dominated by one vast supercontinent, a near continuous sweep of land spanning pole to pole. Oceans were pushed outward, becoming deeper and more distant from the interior. Coastlines shrank, moist air struggled to travel far inland, leaving enormous regions cut off from reliable rain. The center of this supercontinent became a place of distance and dryness, far removed from the moderating influence of the sea. The land grew broad and exposed, stretching beneath a sky that offered little relief. With the oceans pushed aside, climate patterns lost their balance. Heat built up across the interior, lingering without escape. Summers grew harsh and unrelenting, winters sharp and unpredictable. Seasons shifted with little warning, swinging between extremes that left little room for fragile life. Rivers became unreliable, appearing briefly before retreating back into dust. Forests thinned into open woodlands, then into sparse stands of hardy plants clinging to survival. The air itself often felt heavy, shaped by heat rising from bare ground and soil baked hard beneath the sun. This was not a world that rewarded excess or softness. Survival now belonged to creatures that conserved energy, endured scarcity, and moved with purpose. Efficiency mattered more than speed. Endurance mattered more than size alone. Life adapted not toward abundance, but toward restraint. Bodies became more compact or more deliberate, built to function under constant stress. Skin thickened, metabolism adjusted, growth slowed. Every trait carried weight because failure was no longer forgiving. Plants responded first, reshaping the base of the ecosystem. Many developed tougher tissues, waxy coatings, and deeper roots, designed to endure drought and poor soil. These plants offered less nourishment, forcing herbivores to adapt or vanish. Feeding became harder, slower, and more dangerous. This shift rippled upward through the food web, quietly reshaping how animals moved, hunted, and competed. Energy became precious, and waste became costly. In this environment, predators did not rely on chance or abundance. They were shaped by necessity. Hunting required planning, patience, and anatomical precision. Creatures that wasted energy chasing unreliable prey did not last long. Instead, those that succeeded were built for decisive encounters, capable of delivering force efficiently and recovering quickly afterward. Strength became focused rather than sprawling, teeth sharpened into tools rather than ornaments, limbs aligned beneath bodies, carrying weight more steadily across long distances. The harshness of the Permian world acted like a filter, passing life through narrowing constraints. Only those able to function within its limits remained. Over time, this pressure produced animals that felt deliberate, specialized, and severe in form. They did not evolve in a world of comfort or safety, but in one of constant calculation. Each meal mattered, each movement carried consequence. The landscape itself encouraged dominance, because only strong, capable predators could regulate the fragile balance below them. Across this wide land, ecosystems became simpler, but more intense. There were fewer players, but each one carried greater importance. When a predator succeeded, it shaped the lives of countless others. When it failed, the consequences spread outward. Stability emerged not from gentleness, but from control. The Permian world did not overflow with life. It arranged it carefully, selecting for those that could endure long droughts, violent temperature swings, and the quiet pressure of competition that never eased. This was the kind of planet that forged dangerous rulers, not through abundance, but through scarcity. It shaped predators that were not merely large or fast, but refined by hardship. In the heat and dryness of this unified world, life learned to survive without excess, to dominate without comfort, and to persist without mercy. The land itself became a testing ground, patiently sculpting the creatures that would come to rule it. By the time the land had hardened into its new rhythms, something subtle began to change within its living communities. Life had already learned how to endure scarcity, heat, and distance, but endurance alone did not define what followed. A new role slowly took shape, not assigned by intention, but carved out by pressure. This role was not simply that of a hunter, it was the position of an apex predator, a presence that stood above the constant exchange of pursuit and escape that defined earlier ecosystems. An apex predator is not just an animal that eats others. It is a creature without a natural rival, once it reaches maturity, one whose survival is no longer shaped by fear of being hunted in return. Its place in the ecosystem is not negotiated through balance, but established through dominance. Earlier land animals approached this threshold, sometimes briefly, but never fully crossed it. They hunted, scavenged, and competed, yet they remained vulnerable. Injury, competition, or environmental stress kept them bound within a fragile ceiling. Something always hunted them back. In the earlier chapters of life on land, predators existed within crowded hierarchies. Large carnivores were checked by other large carnivores. Speed was answered by agility, strength by numbers. No single form held the top position for long. The land was still learning its rules, and evolution had not yet produced the combinations of traits needed for sustained dominance. Bodies were often powerful but inefficient, quick but fragile, large but poorly supported. Success came in moments, not generations. That changed gradually, almost quietly, as the pressures of the Permian world continued their steady work. The fossil record begins to reveal predators that stood apart from the familiar cycle of threat and retreat. Their bones show fewer signs of trauma from other hunters. Their teeth are not shaped for opportunism, but for certainty. Jaws became deeper and more stable, built to withstand repeated force rather than single strikes. Muscle attachment points expanded, suggesting strength delivered with control rather than desperation. These animals did not rely on luck. Size increased, but not without structure. Limbs grew more aligned beneath the body, allowing weight to be carried efficiently across distance. Movement became smoother, more deliberate, conserving energy while maintaining presence. Speed was no longer just a burst, but a capability sustained long enough to matter. Bite strength rose in parallel, not as brute excess, but as a refined tool. Prey, once protected by chance or confusion, now faced predators designed to end the struggle quickly. The absence of natural enemies marks this shift most clearly. In the layers of stone that preserve these creatures, there is little evidence of anything capable of consistently challenging them. Their remains appear again and again, steady across time, suggesting long periods of control. They did not flicker in and out of dominance, they settled into it. Ecosystems adjusted around their presence, not the other way around. This did not mean the land became empty beneath them. Instead, life arranged itself with care. Prey species adapted in subtle ways, growing more cautious, altering behavior rather than confronting strength directly. Smaller predators avoided direct competition, shifting toward different prey or different times of activity. The apex predators remained, not because they wiped others out, but because nothing else could dislodge them. These were the first true rulers of land ecosystems, not by title, but by effect. Their influence extended beyond their own needs. By controlling prey populations, they shaped vegetation patterns, migration routes, and the distribution of life itself. Their presence was woven into the land, as much a feature of the environment as rivers or plains. Where they walked, the world adjusted. What makes these predators distinct is not just their power, but their stability. They were not experiments that failed quickly, they endured. Generation after generation inherited bodies already suited to dominance, refining them further with each passing age. The land had finally produced animals capable of holding the top position without collapse. In this quiet rise, Earth crossed a threshold. The idea of rule entered its ecosystems, not through sudden conquest, but through persistence. These predators did not announce themselves, they simply remained, shaping the world by continuing to exist at its peak. As dominance settled across the land, another quiet realization begins to surface, one that becomes clearer with every fossil uncovered. The creatures ruling this world do not fit comfortably into the categories we rely on today. They resist tidy labels, slipping through the spaces between familiar groups. When paleontologists first pieced them together, they were not easily placed alongside dinosaurs, nor could they be folded neatly into the lineage of mammals. Their forms feel assembled from unfamiliar logic, shaped by a moment in Earth's history when rules were still being written. Their bodies carry echoes of multiple futures without fully belonging to any of them. Some stand with limbs angled beneath their weight, suggesting efficiency and balance rather than the low sprawl seen in earlier animals. Others retain traces of older designs, with elongated torsos and flexible joints that seem halfway between crawling and walking. Their posture hints at movement that feels deliberate but not yet refined, as if the land itself was still teaching bodies how best to move across its surface. To modern eyes, these shapes feel disorienting. They lack the clean lines we associate with later dinosaurs, yet they also stop short of the compact familiarity seen in mammals. Tails stretch long and heavy, sometimes counterbalancing large heads. Rib cages widen and narrow in unfamiliar proportions. Even their stance feels uncertain in stillness, caught between multiple evolutionary paths at once. They are neither experimental sketches nor final drafts, but something in between, functional and enduring, yet difficult to categorize. The skulls tell this story even more clearly. They do not resemble the delicate, fenestrated heads of later reptiles, nor do they mirror the rounded forms common among mammals. Instead, they appear dense, reinforced, and purposeful. Bones interlock tightly, leaving little room for flexibility, but allowing tremendous force to pass through them. The openings for muscles are often oversized, suggesting jaws capable of delivering controlled strength rather than quick snaps. Teeth sit within these skulls like tools set into stone, varied in size and shape along the jaw, hinting at specialization still taking shape. Some skulls taper sharply, others broaden at the back, anchoring muscles that once pulled with steady power. Eye sockets shift placement, sometimes facing slightly forward, sometimes wide to the side, reflecting different approaches to hunting and awareness. No living animal carries this exact arrangement. These heads belong to a chapter that has no direct continuation, a design language that stopped being written when the Permian world ended. What makes these creatures especially difficult to classify is not confusion, but abundance of possibility. Evolution during this time did not move cautiously. It pressed forward on many fronts at once. With few established competitors and a harsh environment demanding solutions, life explored combinations that would later be trimmed away. Traits that now feel contradictory existed together without issue. Strength did not exclude endurance. Upright posture did not require warmth regulation. Sharp teeth did not yet demand precise jaw mechanics. Everything existed in flexible partnership. This period reflects a moment when evolution itself felt unrestrained. The land was new enough, and its pressures clear enough, that experimentation carried fewer immediate risks. If a body plan worked, even imperfectly, it endured. Refinement could come later, or not at all. Success was measured by survival rather than elegance. Over time, this created creatures that seem overbuilt in places, oddly proportioned in others, yet entirely suited to their world. Modern classification depends on lineages that survived long enough to leave descendants. These Permian rulers did not. Their disappearance erased the pathways that would have clarified their place. Without living representatives to anchor them, they remain isolated in time, understood only through stone impressions and fractured bones. What remains are outlines of bodies that functioned beautifully in a world that no longer exists. Seen this way, their strangeness becomes less puzzling. They are not failures or mistakes. They are evidence of a planet willing to explore widely, to test forms without knowing which would last. In their bones lies a record of creativity driven by pressure, a moment when Earth allowed life to become something unfamiliar simply because it could. Among the many unfamiliar forms that walked the Permian land, some carried a feature so striking that it still feels almost unreal when first encountered in stone. Rising from their backs were tall, narrow structures, formed from extended spines and stretched skin, creating sails that stood higher than the body itself. These were not decorations added later by imagination. They are preserved clearly in fossil after fossil, a biological choice made repeatedly by predators that already held power in a harsh world. Sails like these are rare across the entire history of life on land. Even in later ages, when animals grew larger and more varied, this feature almost never returned. It required a precise combination of anatomy, climate, and function to exist at all. The Permian landscape provided those conditions briefly, and life responded with forms that would never be repeated. These sails were not flimsy additions. They were supported by strong bones, anchored deeply into the spine, and integrated into the animal's balance and movement. Carrying such a structure required strength, stability, and confidence in one's place within the ecosystem. The presence of these sails suggests that something more than survival was being shaped. One explanation offered by scientists drifts toward temperature control. In a world defined by extreme heat and sudden cooling, a broad surface exposed to air and sunlight could help regulate internal warmth. Blood flowing through the sail might warm quickly in morning light or release heat during the harsh midday sun. The sail would have acted like a living exchange with the environment, quietly adjusting the body's internal rhythm to match an unstable climate. Yet temperature alone may not explain the scale and visibility of these structures. The sails were large enough to be seen from a distance, rising above the dry plains and sparse forests like moving silhouettes. This leads gently toward another possibility, that of display. In a landscape where individuals competed not only for food but for territory and mates, being seen mattered. A sail would have transformed the animal into a landmark, a signal that traveled farther than sound or scent. It could communicate presence without conflict, strength without movement. Dominance signaling fits naturally into this picture. In ecosystems shaped by scarcity, unnecessary fights carried risk. Clear visual signals reduced costly encounters. A predator with a towering sail needed no demonstration. Its form spoke before its teeth ever did. Others would adjust their paths, their timing, their behavior, responding to that shape on the horizon. The sail became part of how authority was expressed, woven into daily life without constant violence. These explanations do not compete with one another. They overlap, much like the layered pressures that shape the Permian world itself. A sail could help manage temperature, attract mates, and project dominance all at once. Evolution often favors traits that serve more than one purpose, especially when the cost of maintaining them is high. The fact that these animals carried such structures for millions of years suggests the balance worked. The sails did not weaken them, they enhanced their role. And yet, despite their success, nothing quite like these sail-backed hunters remains today. When the conditions that supported them began to shift, the sails became liabilities rather than assets. Large, exposed structures depend on stable environments. Changes in climate, oxygen levels, or available prey would have altered the delicate balance that made sails useful. What once helped regulate heat could become a burden. What once signaled dominance might demand energy that could no longer be spared. As ecosystems grew more complex and competition intensified, efficiency tightened its grip. Later predators found other ways to regulate temperature, display strength, or assert dominance, methods that required less visible investment. Smaller signals replaced towering ones. Internal systems replaced external displays. The sail, once an elegant solution, no longer fit the direction life was moving. What remains are the bones, standing upright in stone, long after the flesh vanished. They remind us that Earth once allowed predators to become not only effective, but visually extraordinary. These animals were not breaking rules out of defiance. They lived before the rules were fully written. In their sails is a record of a planet still exploring what was possible, briefly allowing life to rise higher, broader, and stranger than it ever would again. As bodies grew more refined and dominance settled into form, another transformation unfolded with little outward drama but lasting consequence. It appeared along the jawline in rows of enamel that no longer served many purposes, but one. Teeth, once modest tools suited for grasping or simple cutting, began to change. They narrowed, lengthened, thickened at the root, their edges sharpened into precise lines. What emerged was not an all-purpose mouth, but a focused instrument built for ending life efficiently. Earlier hunters relied on general solutions. Their teeth worked well enough for a range of foods, capable of gripping struggling prey or tearing at flesh after death. Success depended on persistence, exhaustion, and opportunity. In the Permian world, those methods grew costly. Energy could not be wasted in long pursuits or uncertain struggles. The land rewarded predators that could finish a hunt quickly before heat and dehydration took their toll. Teeth responded to that pressure, slowly turning into weapons rather than tools. This shift changed hunting in ways that went beyond appearance. Specialized teeth allowed predators to target vulnerable points with accuracy. Instead of holding prey until it weakened, jaws delivered damage immediately. Deep punctures reached vital tissue. Cutting edges sliced muscle cleanly, limiting resistance. A single bite could disable, rather than merely restrain. The act of hunting grew quieter, shorter, and more controlled. Movement became less frantic, more deliberate. As teeth changed, so did behavior. Predators no longer needed to rely on repeated bites or prolonged struggles. They could wait, observe, and strike only when conditions favored certainty. This reduced the risk of injury, which mattered deeply in a world without abundance. A broken tooth or damaged jaw could mean starvation. Precision replaced endurance. Selection favored mouths that performed reliably under force, time after time. Prey animals experienced the consequences immediately, even if slowly across generations. Defenses that once worked began to fail. Thick hides offered less protection against teeth designed to pierce rather than scrape. Speed alone could no longer guarantee escape if a single mistake meant sudden collapse. Herding behaviors shifted. Burrowing deepened. Alertness became constant. The landscape filled with quieter tension, an invisible pressure shaping every step. This transformation did not require predators to grow larger or faster. It required refinement. Bone around the jaw thickened to support increased force. Muscle attachment points expanded, allowing steady power rather than sudden snaps. Teeth anchored more securely, resisting breakage even when meeting resistance. The mouth became a system, integrated and reliable, capable of delivering decisive results without chaos. What makes this change especially important is how permanent it became. Once teeth crossed this threshold, hunting itself was rewritten. Predators no longer needed to consume prey over time. They could afford patience. They could afford selectivity. This altered how populations were regulated, how territories were defended, how life arranged itself across the land. The presence of such teeth reshaped ecosystems even when predators were unseen. This was a quiet revolution, one that left no dramatic markers in the rock beyond subtle changes in shape and wear. Yet its influence spread everywhere. It allowed predators to remain dominant without constant conflict. It allowed prey to survive only through caution and adaptation rather than confrontation. The balance of power shifted not through numbers, but through design. These teeth also hint at something deeper unfolding within predator biology. The body was beginning to organize around efficiency rather than excess. Systems worked together: jaw, neck, posture, and movement aligned toward a single outcome. This integration marks a step toward more complex predatory strategies that would persist long after these creatures themselves disappeared. Seen through this lens, teeth become more than fossils. They are records of decision making written in mineral. They show how the land shaped mouths that matched its demands, and how once simple structures became defining tools of rule. In the quiet closing of jaws, the Permian world taught predators how to dominate with certainty rather than struggle, leaving a legacy that would echo through every age that followed. As time continued its slow passage across the Permian land, another shift unfolded within the ranks of its dominant predators. This change was quieter than the rise of sails or the sharpening of teeth, yet it carried a sense of familiarity that lingers even now. Some predators began to move differently. Their bodies lifted slightly higher from the ground, their limbs angled beneath them with greater intention. The earth was no longer something to cling to closely, but a surface to stride across with measured confidence. This more upright posture changed everything that followed. Earlier hunters often moved in a low, sprawling manner, their bellies closer to the ground, their motion shaped by bursts of effort followed by rest. The newer predators carried their weight more evenly, allowing their muscles to work over longer stretches of time. Movement became smoother and less taxing. Energy was spent carefully, distributed across longer distances rather than released all at once. In a land where resources were scattered and the climate rarely offered comfort, this difference mattered deeply. Their limbs tell this story clearly. Bones lengthened and straightened, joints became more stable, and muscles arranged themselves for endurance rather than sudden force alone. These predators were built to travel. They could follow prey across open ground, through dry plains and sparse woodlands, without exhausting themselves quickly. Hunting became less about frantic pursuit and more about persistence. The land favored those who could continue when others slowed. Within these bodies, subtle changes were taking place that would echo far beyond the Permian. The way these animals stood and moved hints at internal systems beginning to shift. Breathing likely became more efficient, supporting sustained activity. Circulation may have adapted to feed muscles steadily rather than sporadically. These were not fully developed mammalian traits, but early steps in that direction, written quietly into bone and posture rather than announced through dramatic transformation. Their skulls and jaws, already refined for precision, now worked in harmony with bodies built for balance and control. Head carriage changed, allowing the senses to scan forward while moving. This alignment created a presence that feels strikingly familiar. When reconstructed, these predators do not resemble distant reptiles alone. They suggest something closer, something that hints at later forms without fully becoming them. This familiarity is what makes them unsettling in a gentle way. They do not look alien in the way earlier creatures did. Instead, they seem almost recognizable, as if borrowing elements from animals that would appear millions of years later. Their stance, their proportions, and the implied coordination of their movement feel closer to mammals than to the classic image of ancient reptiles. Standing beside them, one might sense intention rather than instinct alone, deliberation rather than reflex. Yet they remained firmly of their time. Their skin, their metabolism, their reproduction all anchored them to an older world. They were not ancestors, marching cleanly toward modern mammals. They were participants in an experiment, exploring traits that happened to persist later in different forms. Evolution was not aiming ahead, it was responding to the demands of the moment, assembling bodies that worked under current conditions. The harsh Permian landscape favored endurance, efficiency, and controlled power. These mammal like predators embodied those qualities without excess. Their success did not depend on speed alone or overwhelming size. It rested on the ability to keep moving, to remain effective across long days and long seasons. This made them stable rulers, capable of maintaining dominance without constant confrontation. In the fossil record, their bones often appear with a sense of balance, not exaggerated in one direction or another. This balance hints at lives lived in steady motion, shaped by daily necessity rather than extremes. Their presence suggests a world where survival depended less on sudden advantage and more on sustained capability. In these predators, the future briefly brushed against the present. Traits that would later define mammals surfaced early, tested under different skies and different pressures. They did not lead directly forward, yet they left an impression that lingers in how we recognize them today. Walking upright beneath the Permian sun, these animals carried a shape of things to come, familiar not because they were modern, but because they touched upon a pattern that Earth would revisit again. With predators settled firmly into their place, the Permian world took on a different tone at ground level. For the animals that lived beneath this rule, daily life unfolded under constant awareness. Existence as prey was not defined by moments of pursuit alone, but by an unbroken state of caution. Every movement carried weight, every sound mattered. The land itself seemed to listen, and those who survived learned to move through it with care. Living as prey in the Permian meant adapting not just bodies, but behavior. Open ground was crossed sparingly. Water sources were approached with hesitation. Feeding often happened quickly, followed by long periods of stillness. Many animals timed their activity carefully, avoiding the heat of day or the openness of dusk when shadows stretched far. Even rest was light and alert, shaped by the understanding that danger did not need to announce itself. Over time, these pressures reshaped prey species in visible ways. Some turned toward armor. Thickened skin, reinforced scales, and bony plates appeared across different lineages, forming natural shields against teeth designed to kill cleanly. These defenses added weight and cost energy, but they offered precious seconds when escape mattered more than speed. In a single encounter, that small margin could mean survival. Others followed a different path, trading protection for movement. Limbs lengthened, joints lightened, and bodies narrowed. Speed became a language of survival, not through reckless sprinting, but through quick starts and sharp turns. These animals learned to read the land, using uneven ground, vegetation, and distance to break pursuit. Endurance mattered less here than awareness. The first step often mattered most. Still others disappeared downward, reshaping the land from below. Burrowing became deeper and more complex. Tunnels branched and turned, forming hidden networks that offered safety from eyes and jaws above. Claws strengthened, snouts flattened. Life shifted into the soil, where temperature was steadier and sound traveled differently. The surface world belonged to predators, but beneath it, quieter communities persisted. The fossil record carries signs of this constant pressure. Prey bones often show healed injuries, marks of close encounters survived by chance or adaptation. Herd structures appear more pronounced, suggesting safety in numbers rather than solitude. Body size distributions shift, with extremes fading as the middle ground proved most viable. These patterns speak softly of a world where survival depended on avoiding attention rather than confronting it. Fear, in this sense, became a shaping force, as real as climate or geography. It guided where animals fed, how long they lingered, and how they reproduced. It determined which traits were worth carrying forward and which faded away. Over generations, fear sculpted ecosystems from the inside out, influencing not only prey, but plants as well. Grazing patterns changed. Certain areas were left untouched, not because food was scarce, but because risk was high. Vegetation grew unevenly, shaped by where prey dared to travel. Predators, though often unseen, were always present in these choices. Their absence from a moment did not lessen their influence. The possibility of their arrival was enough. This invisible pressure connected every part of the ecosystem, binding predator and prey into a single, shared rhythm. Life responded not just to what happened, but to what could happen. In such a world, fear did not paralyze life, it organized it. Species that adapted thrived within these constraints, finding balance through caution rather than confrontation. The Permian landscape became a place where survival was measured in awareness, and where ecosystems stabilized around the constant negotiation between hunger and hiding. This was a world ruled not only by those at the top, but by the presence they cast across everything below. Even in stillness, even in silence, the influence of predators shaped the land. Fear flowed quietly through roots, burrows, herds, and paths, leaving a pattern that endured as long as the rulers themselves walked the earth. As the Permian world matured into its long rhythm, dominance did not settle into the grip of a single ruler. Instead, the land carried the weight of several apex predators at once, each powerful, each established, each woven into the fabric of the same ecosystems. Their coexistence did not rely on endless confrontation. It rested on something quieter and more precise, a careful partitioning of life that allowed multiple rulers to remain without tearing the world apart. These predators shared the same continents, the same harsh climate, and often the same prey base, yet they rarely overlapped directly. The land was vast, and its challenges demanded specialization. Over time, each apex predator settled into a role, shaped by its body, its senses, and its preferred way of moving through the world. Dominance became divided not by weakness, but by difference. Some ruled through size and presence. Their bodies were heavy, their movements measured, their authority absolute within defined ranges. These predators favored open ground, where their mass and strength could be brought to bear without obstruction. They did not need speed. Their power lay in inevitability, in being seen and known across their territory. Other predators avoided these spaces naturally, not through fear alone, but through understanding. Elsewhere, leaner hunters claimed different ground. They moved through broken landscapes, weaving among low forests, rocky outcrops, or uneven plains. Their strength lay in pursuit, endurance, or timing rather than sheer mass. These predators thrived where agility and control mattered more than size. Their presence overlapped with others only at the edges, where competition softened into caution rather than conflict. Time itself became another dividing line. Some apex predators were most active beneath the high sun, their physiology suited to heat and exposure. Others preferred cooler hours, moving when shadows lengthened and the land released stored warmth. This separation reduced direct encounters, allowing multiple rulers to claim the same spaces at different moments. The land supported them all by spreading opportunity across the day. Diet added another layer of balance. While all were hunters, they did not all seek the same prey in the same way. Some specialized in large, slow-moving animals, relying on strength and timing. Others focused on quicker prey, using endurance or ambush rather than force. Even carcasses played a role. feeding those adapted to consume what remained after a hunt. Each predator fit into a slightly different position within the same web. This arrangement did not remove tension, it refined it. Boundaries were tested quietly, not constantly broken. Scars and injuries found in fossils hint at encounters that ended without death, reminders that dominance was defended but rarely squandered. True conflict carried risk, and these predators were shaped by efficiency. They did not rule by chaos, they ruled by persistence. The result was a world balanced at its highest level, where multiple apex predators held space without collapsing the system beneath them. Prey species adapted to all of them, learning patterns rather than facing a single overwhelming threat. Ecosystems stabilized around this complexity, becoming resilient through division rather than simplicity. This balance was not delicate in appearance, but it was carefully maintained. Each apex predator depended on the structure of the whole, even as it stood above it. Remove one, and the others would feel the shift, add pressure, and boundaries would tighten. The land itself enforced this arrangement, rewarding those who stayed within their role and removing those who did not adapt. In this way, the Permian world became a place where power was shared without cooperation and dominance was sustained without constant battle. Several rulers walked the same earth, each alone at the top of their own domain, held apart by habit, terrain, and time. Together, they formed a tense but enduring equilibrium, one that defined the height of Permian life and gave the planet a rare moment of ordered strength before change began to gather beneath the surface. Beneath the steady presence of predators and prey alike, the Permian landscape carried its own quiet authority. Day by day, the land unfolded with little variation, yet no sense of comfort. Mornings often arrived dry and pale, the air already holding warmth carried over from the previous day. The ground, hardened by long cycles of heat and scarcity, bore the marks of countless lives that crossed it, pressed into dust and stone. Much of the land stretched open, wide plains broken only by low vegetation and scattered stands of trees adapted to endure long periods without rain. These forests were not dense or shaded. Their canopies left sunlight free to reach the ground, warming the soil and drying whatever moisture remained. Plants grew slowly and deliberately, investing in tough leaves and deep roots rather than height or softness. The color palette of the world leaned toward muted greens, browns, and pale yellows, tones shaped by restraint. Rivers existed, but they were unreliable companions. Many flowed only part of the year, swelling briefly before retreating into narrow channels or vanishing altogether. Dry riverbeds cut through the plains like pale scars, guiding movement even when empty. During wetter seasons, these same paths became vital corridors of life, drawing animals from great distances. When the water withdrew, it left behind cracked earth and scattered pools, each one briefly becoming the center of attention for everything nearby. For predators, these shifting waterways shaped daily life more than any boundary drawn by instinct alone. Water was both resource and meeting point. It attracted prey, concentrated movement, and offered a rare chance to drink deeply. Predators learned the rhythms of these places, arriving with patience rather than urgency. Territories often followed the reach of rivers, expanding and contracting as water came and went. Control of these spaces meant access not just to food, but to life itself. Beyond the plains and river systems, the land rose gently into rocky ground and shallow basins. These areas offered little shelter but created natural paths, funnels that guided movement across the landscape. Animals followed these routes generation after generation, carving invisible trails into the habits of the world. Wind moved freely here, carrying scents across long distances. Sound traveled far, unobstructed by thick growth. The land revealed those who moved upon it, favoring awareness over secrecy. Despite its harshness, the Permian world held a form of stability. Change came slowly, seasons shifted, but patterns repeated. Life adapted not to sudden disaster, but to constant challenge. The predictability of scarcity allowed ecosystems to settle into balance. Species learned where resources appeared and when, adjusting their movements accordingly. This rhythm gave the world a quiet continuity, even as comfort remained out of reach. Predators thrived within this structure. Their ranges expanded across open ground, where visibility favored those with patience and planning. They did not need dense forests to hide within. The land itself offered little cover, making surprise a matter of timing rather than concealment. Water sources became focal points, not battlefields, where dominance was asserted through presence rather than conflict. To be seen at these places was often enough. Prey species followed the same logic. Movement became deliberate, aligned with the landscape's rhythms. Grazing paths curved around water access points. Herds adjusted their size based on distance to rivers and seasonal pools. The land shaped decisions quietly, leaving few alternatives. Those who resisted its logic did not last long. This was a world stripped to essentials. There was no abundance to soften its edges, no thick growth to hide within, no reliable shelter from the elements. Yet it was not chaotic. Its harshness was consistent, its challenges familiar. Life learned to exist within these limits, building ecosystems that endured through discipline rather than excess. The landscape beneath their feet was not merely a backdrop, it was an active force, guiding movement, shaping behavior, and reinforcing dominance. In its dry rivers and open plains lay the foundation of a world that remained stable for millions of years, a world that allowed strange rulers to thrive beneath wide skies and unyielding sun. The long success of the Permian rulers did not come from sudden brilliance or overwhelming strength. It emerged quietly, built on qualities that allowed life to persist rather than impress. These creatures thrived because they fit their world closely, shaped by a landscape that rewarded efficiency above all else. In a land where energy was scarce and conditions rarely gentle, survival belonged to those who wasted little and gained much from each movement, each hunt, and each season endured. Efficiency showed itself first in how these animals used their bodies. Their movement was measured, conserving energy even while traveling long distances. Muscles worked steadily rather than explosively, allowing predators to remain active without exhaustion. Bones supported weight cleanly, reducing strain during extended motion. Nothing about their design encouraged excess. Instead, form followed necessity, producing animals capable of maintaining dominance day after day, generation after generation. Heat was a constant presence in the Permian world, and these creatures were shaped to live within it rather than fight against it. Their bodies likely dissipated warmth effectively, releasing excess heat during the hottest hours and retaining it when temperatures fell. Activity patterns adjusted naturally, with movement timed to cooler periods or shaded terrain. Skin, posture, and internal regulation worked together to keep balance without relying on abundant water or shelter. Scarcity further refined their success. Food was not always plentiful, and hunts did not always end in reward. These predators could endure lean stretches without immediate decline. Their metabolism favored steady use of resources rather than constant intake. This resilience allowed populations to persist even when prey numbers fluctuated. While others faltered during dry years or seasonal stress, These animals continued with little outward change. Reproduction also played a quiet but vital role in their long reign. Though details remain limited in the fossil record, patterns suggest strategies built for endurance rather than rapid turnover. Offspring likely grew at a pace that balanced vulnerability with sustainability. Investment in fewer, well developed young may have increased survival rates in a challenging environment. This approach reduced the need for constant reproduction and allowed stable populations to hold territory over long spans of time. The environments these predators occupied further supported their persistence. Their ranges were shaped by water access and prey movement, both of which followed predictable rhythms. As long as these rhythms held, so did their dominance. These animals did not need to expand aggressively or adapt constantly to new threats. The world around them changed slowly, and they were already well suited to meet it as it was. Dominance lasted millions of years because it was not built on extremes. These creatures were not oversized experiments destined to collapse under their own demands. They occupied a balance point, powerful enough to control ecosystems without draining them beyond recovery. Prey populations adapted in response, creating a system that sustained itself through mutual adjustment rather than escalation. This balance extended even to competition among predators. With niches clearly divided and resources partitioned, direct conflict remained limited. Energy that might have been spent on constant confrontation instead supported long-term survival. The absence of relentless internal struggle allowed populations to remain stable and focused on the broader challenges of the environment. Over time, this quiet success hardened into persistence. Generation after generation inherited bodies already tuned to the demands of the land. Small refinements accumulated without drastic shifts in form or function. Evolution slowed its pace not because creativity ended, but because the solution worked. Stability, once achieved, became its own advantage. In this way, the Permian rulers endured not as conquerors, constantly proving themselves, but as occupants perfectly matched to their world. Their reign did not rely on spectacle or sudden triumph. It rested on the slow, steady alignment between life and environment, a harmony that allowed dominance to stretch across deep time until the world itself began to change. As stability settled into the Permian world, life did not grow cautious, it grew ambitious. With ecosystems holding steady and pressure applied evenly across long stretches of time, evolution began to explore the outer edges of possibility. The result was a cast of animals that appear almost excessive in form, bodies carrying features that seem larger, heavier, or more elaborate than strictly necessary. To modern eyes, these creatures look overdesigned, as if nature briefly forgot the value of restraint. This impression comes not from chaos, but from freedom. The Permian offered long spans without abrupt disruption, allowing successful designs to persist long enough for exaggeration to accumulate. When a trait worked, it was not immediately trimmed back by sudden change. Instead, it was refined, amplified, and layered with additional adaptations. Structures grew taller, thicker, or more complex because nothing yet demanded that they stop. In a sense, life was allowed to linger at the edges of effectiveness. Extreme forms flourished during this time. Spines lengthened beyond simple support. Skulls thickened into powerful frameworks built for force rather than delicacy. Bodies stretched into proportions that favored dominance within specific niches, even if they appeared awkward or excessive by later standards. These were not mistakes. They were solutions shaped by a world that rewarded specialization without penalty. What makes these forms striking is how completely they vanished. Many of the designs perfected during the Permian never reappeared. Later ages would favor efficiency under rapid change, trimming away what could not adapt quickly. The Permian, by contrast, allowed endurance through consistency. Its creatures could afford to carry weight, height, or complexity because the rules did not shift suddenly beneath them. Evolution during this period pushed boundaries not out of recklessness, but because the environment allowed it. Energy demands were predictable. Competition was intense but structured. Predators and prey settled into long standing patterns that reduced surprise. Within this framework, unusual traits could persist long enough to prove themselves. Even if a feature offered only a small advantage, time allowed it to become defining. Yet this freedom carried an unseen cost. As designs grew more specialized, they also became more dependent on the conditions that produced them. A sail worked best under certain climates. A massive skull relied on stable prey availability. A particular limb structure assumed familiar terrain. The very traits that made these animals successful also tied them closely to a specific world. When viewed together, the Permian fauna resemble a gallery of prototypes, each representing a different direction life might take. Some hint at futures that would later reappear in softened form. Others stand alone, belonging only to this moment. Evolution was not choosing a single path. It was surveying the landscape of possibility, testing what could endure under sustained pressure. This experimental phase did not feel rushed. Changes unfolded slowly, layered gently atop one another. There was no sense of urgency. Life adjusted, refined, and expanded within its constraints. The land became a proving ground not for speed, but for persistence. Designs that would later be considered excessive were, at the time, simply effective. Eventually, the push reached its natural limit. Extreme forms filled their niches completely, leaving little room for further elaboration. Evolution, having explored outward, would one day need to pull back. But during the height of the Permian, that moment had not yet arrived. The world still supported these elaborate designs, holding them in place through repetition rather than renewal. Seen from a distance of deep time, the Permian stands apart as a chapter where Earth allowed life to become boldly specific. It was a period defined not by transition, but by commitment. Evolution ran wide, not wild in chaos, but wild in scope, giving shape to creatures that embodied the full confidence of a stable world. Their forms remain as evidence of a planet willing, for a time, to let possibility stretch as far as it could reach. Even during the long calm of the Permian, change did not announce itself loudly. It arrived quietly, layered beneath the surface of apparent stability. The land still looked familiar. The rhythms of life still held, yet subtle signals began to appear, written not in sudden absence but in gentle narrowing. In the rocks laid down during this time, the richness of forms begins to thin, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed when viewed across long stretches of time. The fossil record shows this first as a soft contraction. Fewer variations appear within groups that were once more diverse. Certain lineages continue unchanged, while others fade without replacement. It is not an extinction in the dramatic sense, but a slow reduction, like branches quietly pruned back. Life remains abundant, yet its range of expression grows more limited. The world feels full, but less flexible. These changes echo most clearly among prey species. Shifts in climate and vegetation subtly altered what food was available and where it could be found. Some plants declined in range, others grew tougher and less nourishing. Herbivores adjusted their feeding strategies, but not all could adapt equally. As certain prey became scarcer or more seasonal, the delicate balance supporting predator populations began to tighten. Predators did not vanish, but their options narrowed. Those finely tuned to particular prey found fewer opportunities when numbers dipped. Others were forced to expand their hunting ranges or adjust timing, expending more energy to secure the same reward. The success that once came easily now required careful effort. Nothing collapsed outright, yet the margins that once protected stability began to thin. Specialization, which had brought such success during long periods of consistency, slowly revealed its cost. Traits refined for specific conditions left little room for adjustment. Sails, skull shapes, hunting strategies, and movement patterns all worked beautifully within known limits. But as those limits shifted, even slightly, flexibility became valuable again. Creatures that could not alter their habits or physiology faced quiet pressure, not immediate failure, but persistent strain. This pressure appears in the fossil record as gaps, pauses, and reduced variety. Certain forms disappear without successors filling their role. Others persist but show little innovation, repeating familiar shapes rather than branching outward. Evolution, once expansive, begins to feel constrained. It still moves forward, but with caution rather than confidence. Ecosystems, too, show early signs of tightening. Food webs become simpler, with fewer overlapping roles. When one species declines, fewer alternatives remain to absorb the change. The resilience built through diversity begins to erode, replaced by efficiency balanced on narrower foundations. Life continues, but with less redundancy. The land itself reflects this shift. River systems grow more unpredictable. Productive areas shrink in reach. Seasonal extremes deepen slightly, enough to test adaptations that once held firm. These changes do not arrive as disasters. They repeat gently, year after year, pressing against the same limits until endurance becomes effort. None of this would have been obvious to the creatures living through it. Life went on. Predators still ruled. Prey still adapted. The sun still rose over open plains and sparse forests. Yet beneath this familiarity, the system was becoming less forgiving. What once absorbed stress easily now passed it onward, from plant to herbivore, from prey to hunter. This is how stability begins to change, not through sudden collapse, but through subtle loss of range. The world grows slightly less generous, slightly more precise in what it allows. Traits that once thrived without challenge now operate closer to their limits. Every adjustment matters more than before. These early cracks did not yet threaten the dominance of the Permian rulers. They remained powerful, capable, and present, but their world was slowly losing its ability to support extremes. The experimental richness of earlier ages was giving way to a quieter, tighter equilibrium, one that would not tolerate continued strain indefinitely. In stone and silence, the record preserves this moment of transition, not an ending, but a narrowing path. Life still held its shape, but the space around it was slowly closing in, preparing the ground for changes that would eventually reshape everything that followed. The changes that followed did not arrive as a sudden break from the familiar world. They unfolded gradually, woven into the same skies and landscapes that had supported life for so long. The Permian climate began to lean away from balance, tilting almost imperceptibly at first. Temperatures crept upward, not in dramatic leaps, but in steady increments that accumulated across generations. Days grew warmer, nights held their heat longer, and relief became less dependable. As warmth settled in, moisture retreated. Regions that once received modest seasonal rains found those patterns thinning. Soils dried deeper and held their cracks longer. Plants adapted as they could, slowing growth, thickening tissues, and retreating toward reliable water sources. Yet even these adjustments carried limits. Vegetation became patchier, leaving stretches of land exposed beneath the sun. Shade grew scarce. The ground reflected heat upward, reinforcing the cycle. Rivers responded quietly to these shifts. Seasonal flows weakened, their reach shortened. Channels that once carried water for weeks now did so briefly, leaving behind a chain of shallow remnants rather than continuous paths. Life clustered around these shrinking veins. Animals traveled farther between dependable sources, and the distance itself became a test. What had once been routine movement turned into careful calculation. Seasonal contrasts sharpened. Summers pressed harder, longer, and with greater consistency. Winters offered less predictable relief, sometimes cool, sometimes dry and unremarkable. The transitions between them grew abrupt. Periods of moderate stability shortened, replaced by longer stretches at the extremes. Organisms that relied on narrow windows of favorable conditions found those windows closing sooner than expected. In such a world, survival began to demand precision. Traits that once provided comfortable margins now operated closer to their limits. Bodies finely tuned for heat management found less room for error. Endurance adaptations faced longer trials without recovery. Behaviors shaped for predictable seasons had to adjust repeatedly. Each successful day required careful balance between effort and conservation. For predators, these changes altered the rhythm of dominance. Hunting still succeeded, but it cost more. Energy burned faster under higher temperatures. Time spent traveling between water and prey increased. A missed opportunity carried greater consequence than before. Predators could no longer rely on abundance to offset inefficiency. Every action mattered, not dramatically, but persistently. Prey species experienced the same narrowing margins. Access to food fluctuated more sharply. Escape routes dried out. Burrows offered shelter, but only if the ground could support them. Armor and speed still helped, yet neither could compensate for dehydration or prolonged heat exposure. Survival depended on aligning movement, feeding, and rest with increasingly unforgiving patterns. What stands out in this turning climate is not collapse, but compression. The world continued, yet with less generosity. Life still filled the land, but the space within which it could function shrank. The breadth of tolerable conditions narrowed. Adaptations once considered robust now required careful maintenance. These pressures accumulated quietly. Each year that passed under slightly harsher conditions reinforced the same lesson. There was less room to absorb error. Flexibility became valuable again, while extreme specialization began to feel costly. Stability, once a defining feature of the Permian, started to feel conditional. The landscape reflected this change subtly. Colors shifted toward dustier tones, plant cover thinned, animal movement traced more defined paths between shrinking resources. Ecosystems still held together, but the connections between their parts grew taut. Stress did not yet unravel the system, but it began to test its seams. This turning of climate did not announce an ending. It marked a transition into a phase where success required continual adjustment rather than inherited advantage alone. The margins that had allowed dominance to persist for millions of years were slowly narrowing, reshaped by warmth, dryness, and seasonal strain. The Permian world remained recognizable, but it was becoming a place where endurance alone was no longer enough. As the climate continued its slow tightening, another force began to stir beneath the surface of the world, unseen yet immense. Deep within the crust, pressures built over long spans of time, gathering strength far beyond the awareness of any living creature. When this force finally expressed itself, it did not do so briefly or in isolation. It unfolded across vast regions, reshaping the planet through eruptions that lasted not days or years, but lifetimes stacked upon lifetimes. Late in the Permian, volcanic activity intensified on a scale rarely matched in Earth's history. Lava flowed across enormous stretches of land, spreading in wide sheets rather than single peaks. These eruptions did not need to be visible everywhere, to be felt everywhere. They released gases steadily, persistently, lifting them into the atmosphere where they could circulate freely. The sky changed gradually, layer by layer, as the chemistry of the air began to shift. These volcanic gases altered more than the color of sunsets. They changed how heat moved through the world. Some trapped warmth close to the surface, deepening the rising temperatures already in motion. Others interacted with moisture and sunlight, influencing rainfall and cloud formation. The balance that had once allowed predictable seasons grew increasingly unstable. Heat pressed down more heavily, while dryness extended farther across the continents. The oceans absorbed much of this change silently. Gases dissolved into seawater, altering its chemistry and reducing its capacity to support life as it once had. Marine ecosystems began to falter, disrupting food chains that had long connected land and sea. The effects did not remain isolated to coastlines. Nutrient cycles shifted, and the stability that linked ocean productivity to terrestrial life weakened. On land, there was no refuge from these planetary changes. Even creatures far from volcanic regions felt the impact. The atmosphere carried heat and chemical imbalance across the globe, erasing the advantage of distance. Water sources became less reliable as climate patterns fractured further. Plants struggled to grow consistently, their productivity reduced by heat stress and altered soils. As vegetation faltered, everything above it felt the strain. Land animals could not outrun these changes. Migration offered little relief when conditions shifted everywhere at once. Burrowing insulated against temperature swings only briefly. Behavioral adaptations that had served well under previous stress now encountered limits imposed by the environment itself. The land, once harsh but reliable, grew increasingly unpredictable. Predators, though still powerful, found their authority tested by forces beyond competition. Hunting success no longer guaranteed survival when water became scarce or prey grew weaker and fewer. Energy costs rose sharply. Recovery times lengthened. The precise balance that had supported dominance began to unravel, not through loss of strength, but through loss of support. Herbivores faced similar challenges. Reduced plant growth narrowed feeding windows. Toxins released through volcanic activity may have altered vegetation, making some plants less nourishing or more difficult to digest. Survival demanded continual adjustment, yet the pace of change offered little time for refinement. What makes these volcanic forces especially significant is their persistence. This was not a single catastrophic moment, but a prolonged reshaping of the planet's baseline conditions. Each eruption layered new stress atop old, reinforcing patterns already pushing life toward its limits. The world did not recover between pulses. It accumulated strain. Gradually, Earth itself became a more hostile place for its rulers. The traits that once ensured dominance were now tied to environments that no longer existed. Large bodies demanded more resources. Specialized adaptations relied on conditions that had shifted beyond their range. The land still appeared familiar in shape, yet its underlying chemistry and climate were drifting away from what life had evolved to withstand. This transformation marked a profound turning point. The danger did not come from enemies or competition, but from the planet's own processes. The same Earth that had nurtured long stability now imposed challenges that ignored hierarchy and strength. In the quiet persistence of volcanic change, the ground beneath the ruler's feet grew less welcoming, setting the stage for a world that would soon look very different from the one they had mastered for so long. As volcanic forces continued to reshape the planet, another change unfolded quietly within the air itself. Oxygen, long taken for granted by the ecosystems of the Permian, began to slip away. This shift left no obvious mark on the landscape. The sky looked the same, the wind moved as it always had, yet the very substance that fueled movement, growth, and endurance was slowly thinning. Evidence of this change rests subtly in stone and chemistry. Ancient sediments record shifts in atmospheric balance, while fossils hint at the strain placed on bodies once supported by richer air. It was not an abrupt loss. Oxygen levels declined gradually, almost gently, but steadily enough to matter. Each breath carried slightly less energy than before. Over generations, that difference accumulated into consequence. For small animals, this change was manageable at first. Their bodies required less oxygen to function. Short bursts of activity remained possible. Rest came easily. But for large predators, the effect was immediate and persistent. Their size, once an advantage, now demanded more from every breath. Muscles that had powered long pursuits and controlled dominance began to operate closer to their limits. Stamina faded before strength did. These predators could still strike with force, still assert control in brief encounters, but sustaining effort became harder. A chase that once lasted comfortably now required longer recovery. Heat built more quickly within large bodies, and cooling took more time. The balance between effort and reward shifted subtly but consistently toward loss. Hunting efficiency declined not because predators forgot how to hunt, but because the environment no longer supported the same output. Movements slowed slightly, reaction times stretched. Precision suffered under fatigue. Each hunt carried greater risk of exhaustion, even when successful. Over time, the cost of failure rose higher than before. This disadvantage remained largely invisible in the fossil record as dramatic injury or collapse. Instead, it appears as absence. Fewer individuals reached full size. Fewer species persisted at the top of the food web. Dominance that once felt stable began to feel effortful. Large predators did not vanish all at once. They became fewer, their presence thinning as conditions quietly worked against them. Prey species, though still pressured, experienced the change differently. Many relied on short movements or defensive behaviors that demanded less oxygen. Burrowing, hiding, and brief dashes required less sustained effort. While they too faced stress, the imbalance favored those whose survival did not depend on prolonged exertion. The ecosystems that had once been shaped by powerful, enduring hunters began to adjust. Predators shifted tactics when possible, favoring ambush over pursuit, patience over movement. Yet even these adaptations had limits. Reduced oxygen affected not only muscles, but recovery, growth, and reproduction. Over time, even well-tuned bodies found fewer paths forward. What makes this shift especially profound is its silence. Oxygen does not announce its absence. There are no visible warnings, no sudden thresholds crossed in a single moment. Life simply finds itself working harder to achieve the same results. This quiet resistance changes outcomes without spectacle. The Permian rulers had been shaped for endurance, but endurance depends on fuel. As oxygen levels fell, the foundation beneath their success weakened. The world no longer rewarded size and sustained dominance as it once had. Instead, it favored restraint, efficiency, and lower demands. This change did not immediately overturn ecosystems. The familiar patterns still held for a time. Predators still ruled, prey still adapted, yet the advantage had shifted subtly away from the giants that once defined the land. Their strength remained, but the environment no longer carried its share of the burden. In this thinning air, dominance became heavier to maintain. Each generation faced the same challenge with fewer resources to meet it. The disadvantage was not imposed by rivals or competition, but by the planet itself, adjusting its atmosphere without regard for who had ruled before. Through this quiet transformation, the stage was set for a world where power alone would no longer be enough to endure. As oxygen thinned and heat pressed longer into each season, the balance that once held ecosystems together began to loosen. The change did not start at the top, where the great predators still moved with authority. It began quietly below, among the prey species and the plants they depended on. Life at these lower levels had always carried the weight of the system, and now that weight became harder to bear. Prey animals began to disappear at a pace that predators could not easily follow. Some declined as vegetation grew less nourishing or less predictable. Others struggled with water scarcity, heat stress, and reduced reproductive success. The losses were scattered at first, uneven and regional. Yet over time, the pattern sharpened. Familiar forms became less common. Herds thinned, burrows fell silent. The land still appeared occupied, but the density of life beneath the surface was fading. Predators felt this change indirectly before they felt it directly. Hunts grew longer. Success required more effort and patience. A missed opportunity carried greater cost, since the next chance might come later than expected. Even successful hunts delivered less energy if prey were smaller, weaker, or fewer in number. The efficiency that once defined dominance began to erode. Ecosystems unravel from the bottom up because every level rests upon the one below it. When plants struggle, herbivores follow. When herbivores falter, predators face scarcity. The Permian world had been built on careful balance, but that balance relied on steady input at its base. As that input declined, the structure above it strained to hold shape. Some predators attempted to adapt. They expanded ranges, shifted prey preferences when possible, or altered hunting strategies. But adaptation takes time, and the pace of loss was beginning to outstrip the pace of change. Highly specialized hunters found few alternatives when their preferred prey vanished. Bodies refined for particular tasks had limited flexibility to explore new roles. Dominance itself became a burden. Large size demanded regular nourishment. Muscles required fuel even at rest. Territories that once offered abundance now supported only fragments of their former life. Predators that could once afford patience now faced the pressure of urgency. Each day without success carried greater consequence than before. This is where strength turns inward, becoming a weakness rather than an advantage. Traits that ensured control under stable conditions became liabilities when resources dwindled. Large predators could not shrink overnight. Their systems could not easily downshift into lower demand. They were bound to the world as it had been, not the world as it was becoming. The fossil record preserves this moment as a thinning of presence rather than sudden absence. Apex predators appear less frequently. Their remains cluster in fewer regions. The diversity that once characterized the top of the food web narrows. What remains feels heavier, more fragile, stretched across a system no longer able to support it. Below them, ecosystems continue to simplify. Roles once shared among multiple species collapse into fewer hands or vanish entirely. Without redundancy, each loss carries greater impact. Feedback loops tighten. Stress compounds. Recovery becomes more difficult with each passing generation. This marks the beginning of irreversible loss, not because extinction arrives instantly, but because the conditions necessary for recovery are slipping away. Once prey populations fall below certain thresholds, predators cannot rebound even if conditions stabilize briefly. Once plant communities fracture beyond repair, the foundation remains unstable long after stress eases. The world does not fall apart in a single moment. It sheds pieces quietly, almost politely, as if unaware of what is being lost. Yet with each disappearance, the future narrows. The paths forward become fewer, steeper, less forgiving. For millions of years, the Permian rulers had shaped the land through dominance built on balance. Now that balance was dissolving beneath them. The collapse of food chains did not announce itself with noise or spectacle. It moved through empty spaces, through mist tracks and quieter plains. In that growing absence, the old order began to slip away, not through defeat, but through starvation of the very systems that had sustained it. The transition into the great dying did not come as a single moment that life could recognize. It unfolded as a deepening of everything that had already begun. The land was warmer, the air thinner, the food webs strained. Then, almost without ceremony, loss accelerated beyond recovery. What had been narrowing paths became closed doors. The world entered the most severe extinction it has ever known, not through sudden drama, but through relentless persistence. Life did not vanish all at once. It faded unevenly, region by region, lineage by lineage. Entire groups that had thrived for millions of years slipped quietly from the record. The fossil layers tell this story with absence more than debris. Tracks stop appearing, bones grow rare, familiar shapes simply end. Across land and sea, species disappeared faster than new ones could emerge, leaving gaps that were never filled. The scale of loss was vast, but it did not need exaggeration to be understood. Most complex life on land vanished. In the oceans, whole ecosystems collapsed. Coral-like structures dissolved. Food chains that once spanned from microscopic organisms to great predators unraveled completely. Recovery was not immediate because there was little left to recover from. The living world was reduced to fragments, scattered survivors clinging to marginal spaces. This extinction was different from what had come before. Earlier crises had struck sharply, followed by rebounds shaped by surviving diversity. The Great Dying unfolded as a layered failure. Climate stress, oxygen loss, volcanic upheaval, and ecological collapse reinforced one another without pause. There was no relief period, no chance for ecosystems to stabilize before the next pressure arrived. Each blow landed on a system already weakened. For the great Permian rulers, this meant there was no final battle, no singular defeat. Their end came through the quiet erosion of everything they required. Prey vanished. Water became unreliable. Air no longer supported sustained effort. Reproduction faltered. Each generation faced harsher limits than the one before. Eventually, even the most refined adaptations could not bridge the gap between demand and supply. What makes this loss especially profound is how complete it was. The ruling age did not transition smoothly into something new. It ended. The elaborate forms, the over-designed bodies, the long refined strategies vanished together, leaving no direct heirs. This was not replacement, but erasure. The world reset, not by choice, but by necessity. In the layers of rock that mark this boundary, time itself seems compressed. Millions of years of dominance give way to thin bands of survival. The abundance that once defined the Permian disappears, replaced by signs of stress, then near silence. Earth did not simply lose species, it lost complexity. The relationships that bound life together fell apart faster than they could be rebuilt. And yet, the planet endured. Even at its most reduced, life did not fully extinguish itself. Small, adaptable organisms persisted. Generalists found refuge where specialists could not. In low oxygen pockets, in marginal climates, in overlooked corners of the world, survival continued quietly. The great dying cleared space not with intention, but with consequence. The end of the ruling age was not marked by a new ruler rising immediately. It left behind an emptiness that lingered. Ecosystems took immense spans of time to regain structure. The land stood altered, stripped of the forms that once shaped it. Rivers still flowed, winds still crossed open ground, but the presence that had once dominated these spaces was gone. This was the great dying, not because the planet ceased, but because so much of its history ended at once. An entire way of life, refined over deep time, disappeared within a geological blink. The world moved forward, but it did so changed, quieter and less certain. In this moment, Earth closed a long chapter. The age of the bizarre rulers did not fade into legend. It was sealed beneath stone, leaving behind only fragments and impressions. What followed would be built upon this silence, shaped by absence as much as by survival. In the layers of stone laid down after the great dying tightened its grip, the story of the old rulers comes to a quiet and unmistakable end. The fossil record, which once carried their presence with confidence and repetition, changes its tone. Bones that had appeared steadily through countless layers now become rare, then absent. Tracks that once crossed riverbanks and open ground stop appearing. The stone does not dramatize this moment. It simply records what remains and what does not. The final layers that contain these apex predators feel abrupt in their stillness. There is no long tapering off, no gentle blending into new forms. One moment, their remains are there, familiar and recognizable. Then, they are gone. The patterns that defined the Permian world break sharply, leaving behind a gap where dominance once stood. The land does not replace them immediately. It holds the emptiness. What stands out most is the lack of transition. In earlier chapters of life's history, change often came with overlap. Old forms faded as new ones rose alongside them. In this case, the rulers disappear without successors waiting in the wings. No smaller versions step forward. No modified descendants carry their outline into the future. The traits that once ruled ecosystems do not pass cleanly into the next age. They end. This absence speaks louder than abundance ever did. The stone offers no evidence of retreat into marginal niches, no signs of adaptation buying time. The apex predators of the Permian do not dwindle into shadows of themselves. They cease. Their story ends not with transformation, but with stillness. In place of their remains, the fossil record shows layers marked by simplicity, fewer large bones, fewer signs of complex food webs. The diversity that once filled the land contracts sharply. Life persists, but at smaller scales. Generalists appear. Opportunistic forms leave faint traces. The grand shapes of the past do not return. This silence is not caused by erosion or lack of preservation. The sediments themselves continue faithfully, capturing what exists above them. The absence of the rulers is real. Their disappearance is recorded not through destruction, but through non-appearance. The ground kept forming, the world kept moving, the dominant forms did not. For paleontologists, This moment stands as one of the clearest boundaries in Earth's history. A ruling age ends without ceremony. The continuity that once stretched across millions of years breaks within a narrow span of stone. Time seems compressed here, as if the planet itself chose to close a door rather than slowly walk away. The emotional weight of this record lies in its restraint. There are no dramatic death assemblages piled together, no chaotic layers of mixed remains. Instead, there is order, followed by absence. The world does not appear to struggle noisily with loss. It adjusts quietly, reorganizing itself around what remains. This quiet ending reinforces how complete the change was. The old rulers do not influence the early recovery directly. Their bones do not dominate the layers that follow. Their presence does not linger as ghosts in the stone. The world that emerges afterward is not built with them in mind. In this way, silence becomes evidence. It tells of an extinction that did not merely thin populations, but removed entire modes of life. The land moved forward without the shapes that once defined it. The stone preserved the memory of that decision by leaving space where once there was form. The final fossil record of the rulers stands as a clean edge in deep time. Before it, dominance, complexity, and strange refinement. After it, simplicity, caution, and slow rebuilding. Between those states, only a narrow band of rock where one world ends and another waits to begin. Here, in this quiet boundary, the story of the Permian rulers reaches its last mark, not with collapse carved into stone, but with a calm, undeniable absence. The silence does not ask to be interpreted. It simply remains, holding the shape of a world that once was, and the certainty that it will never return. After the last traces of the old rulers vanished from the stone, the world they left behind felt profoundly altered. The land remained, shaped by rivers, plains, and skies that still followed their ancient paths, yet something essential was missing. Ecosystems once organized around powerful predators now stood without their highest presence. The familiar pressure that had guided movement, behavior, and balance across millions of years was gone. In this emptied world, prey animals moved through landscapes that no longer carried the same tension. Paths once avoided grew quiet. Water sources no longer gathered watchful eyes at the edges. The absence of top predators did not bring immediate harmony. Instead, it revealed how much structure they had quietly provided. Without them, populations shifted unevenly. Some species expanded briefly, unrestrained by fear or control, while others struggled, adapted to pressures that no longer existed. Balance did not vanish instantly, but it loosened. Plants felt the change as well. Grazing patterns altered. Certain areas experienced heavier feeding, while others were left untouched. The land began to show signs of imbalance, with growth concentrating in some places and thinning in others. Without predators guiding movement through risk, the flow of life across the landscape became less organized. The old rhythms faded, replaced by quieter, uncertain patterns. This vacuum mattered because it exposed how ecosystems rely on absence as much as presence. Top predators had shaped the world not just through what they consumed, but through where they were expected to be. Their disappearance removed an organizing force that had kept life distributed and resilient. The world did not collapse without them, but it did not function the same way either. Complexity declined, not from immediate loss, but from lack of coordination. In the fossil record, this period appears sparse and restrained. Large bones become rare. Traces of complex interaction fade. What remains are signs of survival rather than dominance. Small, Adaptable organisms appear more often, their forms modest, their strategies simple. Life persisted, but cautiously. The land entered a phase of waiting, carrying the memory of what had been without replacing it. Earth itself seemed to pause, not in stillness, but in recovery that moved at a slower pace than before. Processes continued, soil formed, rivers shifted, climates adjusted, yet biological innovation remained restrained. The planet was healing from a deep wound, one that had stripped away much of its living structure. Rebuilding required stability, and stability took time to return. Recovery does not mean immediate replacement. New rulers could not rise until ecosystems beneath them regained strength. Food webs had to reassemble from the bottom up. Plants needed to spread and diversify. Herbivores needed to stabilize in number and distribution. Only then could larger, more demanding life forms find support. The empty spaces left by the Permian rulers remained open because the foundation beneath them was still fragile. During this time, Earth carried potential rather than fulfillment. The absence of dominance created room for experimentation, but only at smaller scales. Life tested new paths quietly, favoring flexibility over specialization. The planet leaned toward caution, shaped by the memory of how thoroughly complexity had been erased. This empty world was not a failure, it was a necessary interval. By removing the old rulers and delaying the rise of new ones, Earth prevented immediate repetition of the same vulnerabilities. The pause allowed ecosystems to rebuild with different balances, setting the stage for future chapters that would unfold under new conditions. In this way, the silence left by vanished predators became part of Earth's long rhythm. The land waited, not passively, but patiently, gathering strength through small successes and slow connections. Life learned to move again without the guiding presence of dominance, preparing for a time when new rulers would eventually emerge. For now, the world remained open and unfinished. Beneath wide skies and across recovering plains, Earth carried forward without its old masters, holding space for what might come next, and honoring, through absence, the deep and lasting impact of the age that had just ended. The world that followed the great dying did not rush to fill its emptiness. After so much loss, Earth moved carefully, as if uncertain of its own footing. The land was quieter, its rhythm slower, its energy restrained. Life persisted, but it did so without urgency. The disappearance of the old rulers had left more than open space. It had left systems weakened, connections severed, and foundations still fragile. Recovery after such an extinction stretches far beyond the disappearance itself. The immediate aftermath is not a blank canvas ready for bold new figures, but a damaged surface that must first be stabilized. Soil needs time to rebuild nutrients. Plant communities must spread again, binding the land and softening extremes. Without dense vegetation, erosion reshapes landscapes faster than life can respond. Rivers cut deeper, deserts expand and retreat unevenly. These physical processes shape what biology can attempt. In this recovering world, dominance does not return overnight because dominance demands support. Large, powerful animals require steady food sources, predictable environments, and resilient ecosystems beneath them. None of these were fully present. Food chains were short and uneven. Prey populations fluctuated sharply. Climatic conditions remained unsettled. Any creature that attempted to rise too quickly faced the same fate as those that had come before. Evolution responds to opportunity, but it also responds to constraint. After the extinction, constraint ruled. The surviving organisms were not the strongest or largest from the old world, but the most flexible. They carried simple needs, modest bodies, and broad tolerances. Their success lay in endurance rather than ambition. This set the tone for what could follow. Rebuilding moved from the bottom upward. Plants diversified slowly, experimenting with new strategies under changing conditions. Herbivores followed cautiously, adapting to new food sources and shifting landscapes. Each step depended on the stability of the one before it. Predators remained small and opportunistic, shaped by scarcity rather than abundance. There was no rush toward size or specialization. This slow rebuilding is visible in the fossil record as a long interval of modest forms. The land supports life, but not grandeur. Ecosystems regain structure gradually, adding layers over millions of years rather than leaping forward. The planet was not waiting for dinosaurs specifically, it was waiting for balance. The idea that a new ruling group should appear immediately assumes that vacancy equals invitation. In reality, vacancy after catastrophe often signals danger. The absence of top predators reflected a world not yet capable of sustaining them. Attempts at dominance during this period would have faced unstable prey bases, shifting climates, and frequent setbacks. Survival favored restraint. This interval shaped the future as deeply as the extinction itself. By forcing evolution to proceed slowly, it filtered out extremes and encouraged resilience. Traits that succeeded during this time emphasized efficiency, adaptability, and tolerance. These qualities would later support more complex forms, but only after the environment could again support complexity. The planet during this recovery felt quiet, not empty, but subdued. Movement continued, yet without the tension that had once defined life. There were fewer large tracks etched into mud, fewer signs of prolonged pursuit. Sounds would have been softer, activity more localized. The land breathed slowly, adjusting its systems piece by piece. This quiet period is often overlooked because it lacks spectacle, yet it is here that the groundwork for future dominance was laid. Without this pause, later rulers would have faced the same vulnerabilities that doomed their predecessors. Earth needed time to recalibrate its chemistry, its climates, and its biological networks. When dinosaurs eventually appeared, they did not step into a ready-made throne. They entered a world that had been rebuilt carefully beneath them, one that could finally support large bodies, complex behaviors, and long-lasting dominance again. Their rise was possible not because they were inevitable, but because the planet had finished healing. In this way, the delay was not an absence of progress. It was progress itself, unfolding quietly across a planet that understood, through deep experience, the cost of moving too fast. Even though the Permian rulers vanished completely from the surface of the earth, they did not disappear from life's deeper architecture. Their absence in flesh concealed a quieter persistence, one carried forward not in bodies, but in traits. The world that rebuilt itself after the Great Dying did not start from nothing. It inherited subtle lessons, refined solutions, and tested designs that had already proven their value under pressure. Many of the qualities that later animals would rely on had been explored during the Permian. Upright movement, more efficient breathing, differentiated teeth, and endurance-based locomotion did not emerge suddenly in later ages. They had already existed, shaped by heat, scarcity, and long dominance. Though the original rulers were gone, the blueprint of their success remained available to evolution, waiting to be reused in new forms. One of the clearest threads of this legacy appears in the rise of mammals. The Permian world had already produced animals that walked with limbs held beneath their bodies, conserving energy and supporting sustained movement. These postures reduced strain and improved balance, allowing longer activity without exhaustion. Later, mammal ancestors did not invent these solutions. They inherited and refined them, shaping them to fit a changing world. Teeth tell a similar story. The shift from simple, uniform teeth to specialized shapes designed for cutting, piercing, and processing food efficiently began long before mammals existed. This innovation allowed animals to exploit a wider range of diets and extract more energy from each meal. Mammals would later perfect this approach, but the foundation had already been laid by predators that learned to kill cleanly and efficiently. Internal systems also carry echoes of this lost age. More efficient respiration, improved circulation, and the separation of movement from breathing likely trace part of their history to Permian experiments. These features supported endurance rather than short bursts, favoring animals that could remain active under demanding conditions. In later ages, these same qualities would become defining features of mammalian life. Even behaviors show traces of this ancient influence. Patterns of parental investment, territorial awareness, and flexible hunting strategies find early expression in Permian ecosystems. These were not instincts copied directly, but strategies shaped by the same constraints. When similar pressures returned in later worlds, evolution reached for familiar answers. What makes this legacy especially striking is that it survived total extinction. The Permian rulers left no descendants in the traditional sense. There is no straight line from their skeletons to modern animals. Yet the solutions they explored proved durable enough to reappear independently, again and again, in different lineages. This recurrence is not coincidence. It reflects the deep utility of those traits. In this way, the Permian rulers shaped what followed not by surviving, but by demonstrating what worked. Their long reign tested endurance under heat, scarcity, and complexity. When the world rebuilt itself, it favored organisms that rediscovered similar balances, even if they arrived there by different paths. These influences linger like ghosts in modern biology. They appear in the way mammals move, breathe, and eat. They echo in how large predators balance energy and effort. They whisper through anatomical patterns that feel familiar, even comforting, despite their ancient origin. These are not memories carried by consciousness, but by structure. The story of life is often told through survivors, yet absence can shape the future just as strongly. The Permian rulers contributed to the world not by lasting forever, but by expanding the range of what life could become. Their extinction cleared space, but their legacy quietly guided how that space was filled. Seen this way, the Permian was not a dead end. It was a deep rehearsal. The planet learned what forms could endure, what systems could support complexity, and what balance allowed dominance to persist. Those lessons did not vanish when the rulers did. They flowed forward, resurfacing when conditions allowed, shaping the animals that would one day dominate Earth again. Beneath modern skin and bone, traces of that ancient world remain. They do not announce themselves loudly. They persist quietly, embedded in the way life works. The Permian rulers are gone, yet their influence still moves, subtle and enduring, through the living world we know today. The story of Earth is vast, layered, and quiet in its patience, yet the way it is often told is narrow and hurried. When ancient life is discussed, attention tends to leap forward to familiar giants, leaving earlier worlds behind like unvisited rooms in a long corridor. The Permian rulers, despite their long reign and deep influence, are rarely invited into the conversation. Their absence from popular memory is not due to their insignificance, but to how stories are shaped. Dinosaurs occupy a comfortable place in modern imagination. Their forms are dramatic, their extinction dramatic, and their descendants still walk among us as birds. This continuity makes them easier to hold on to. By contrast, the creatures that ruled before them left no living heirs, no feathers or scales to point at and say, "This is where they went." Without that visible bridge to the present, they drift further from common awareness. Storytelling has a natural tendency to simplify deep time. Millions of years are compressed into sentences. Complex transitions are smoothed into clean arcs. The mind prefers a few clear chapters rather than a long series of overlapping movements. In this compression, certain ages become symbols, while others become footnotes. The Permian, sitting between the rise of life on land and the age of dinosaurs, is often treated as a prelude rather than a complete story in its own right. Entire ages get skipped because they do not fit easily into a familiar narrative. The Permian rulers were not prototypes of dinosaurs, nor were they early versions of mammals. They were something else entirely, occupying a long and stable world that does not align neatly with later outcomes. Their story does not point forward clearly, it stands alone. And stories that stand alone are often passed over. There is also the challenge of language. Many of these animals carry unfamiliar names and forms that resist easy comparison. Without clear labels, they remain abstract. Dinosaurs benefit from repetition and recognition. Their names appear early in education, in books, films, and exhibits. The Permian rulers rarely receive the same treatment, and absence reinforces itself. What is not named often feels less real. Yet skipping these ages distorts Earth's story. It suggests that life moved directly from simple beginnings to dinosaurs, as if complexity waited patiently for a single moment to arrive. In truth, complexity surged and stabilized long before dinosaurs appeared. Entire ecosystems rose, matured, and collapsed without ever touching the dinosaur chapter. To overlook this is to misunderstand how deeply life experiments before settling on familiar outcomes. Restoring these lost chapters does not require replacing well-known stories, only widening the frame. The Permian world reveals that dominance does not always look the same. It shows that Earth has hosted many ruling ages, each shaped by different conditions and pressures. By acknowledging these periods, the narrative of life gains texture rather than confusion. When these forgotten rulers are brought back into view, the continuity of life becomes clearer. Evolution stops looking like a ladder and begins to resemble a woven fabric, with threads appearing, vanishing, and reappearing elsewhere. Traits once thought unique to later animals are revealed as older, refined through earlier trials. Extinction stops feeling like failure and starts to look like transition, harsh but instructive. The quiet nature of the Permian story may be another reason it is overlooked. There is no single dramatic rise, no immediate successor waiting to take the stage. Its end is marked by absence rather than spectacle. Yet within that quiet lies one of the most important lessons Earth offers, that stability can be long, dominance can be deep, and loss can reshape everything that follows. By restoring these chapters, Earth's history becomes less about iconic creatures and more about processes. It becomes a story of balance, experimentation, collapse, and renewal played out many times over. The Permian rulers deserve remembrance not because they resemble what came later, but because they remind us that the planet has worn many faces before arriving at the one we recognize today. In bringing attention back to them, we do not complicate the story, we complete it. Long after the Permian rulers vanished from the surface of the world, they remained present in fragments. Their lives did not disappear completely. They were broken into pieces and sealed within stone, scattered across ancient floodplains, deserts, and seabeds that slowly turned to rock. What scientists encounter today is not a complete record, but a quiet invitation, one that must be approached with patience and restraint. Fossils are incomplete by nature. Most creatures leave nothing behind at all. Soft tissues fade quickly, tracks erode, and bones are scattered or destroyed long before burial. What survives is shaped as much by chance as by biology. A single tooth, a partial jaw, or a scattering of vertebrae might be all that remains of an animal that once ruled its world. From these fragments, scientists do not attempt to recreate certainty, but possibility. Bones, even when incomplete, carry stories within them. Their thickness hints at muscle strength. The angle of joints suggests how an animal moved through its environment. Wear patterns on teeth reveal how food was processed, whether flesh was sliced, crushed, or torn cleanly. Small marks where muscles once attached speak of endurance, speed, or sudden power. Nothing is assumed quickly. Each detail is weighed against the others, then placed within the broader context of the land that surrounded it. Behavior emerges slowly from this process. A skeleton does not tell a story on its own. It gains meaning only when compared with others like it, found in similar layers across wide regions. When the same body plan appears repeatedly, scientists begin to understand its success. When certain injuries heal consistently, survival strategies are suggested. When juvenile fossils appear alongside adults, patterns of growth and care begin to surface. Modern tools allow these fragments to speak more clearly than ever before. High-resolution imaging reveals internal structures hidden within bone. Microscopic analysis exposes growth rates and stress lines, recording moments of abundance and hardship across an animal's lifetime. Chemical signatures preserved within fossils reflect ancient diets, climates, and even oxygen availability. Each technique adds a layer, gently filling gaps without forcing conclusions. Computational modeling allows scientists to test how these animals may have moved. Digital skeletons are animated within simulated environments, revealing what motions were efficient and which would have caused strain or collapse. These models do not recreate exact behavior, but they define boundaries. They show what was possible and what was unlikely, narrowing the space within which life unfolded. The surrounding rock is just as important as the fossil itself. Sediments reveal whether an animal lived near rivers, open plains, or arid basins. Pollen grains and plant impressions hint at vegetation density and available food. Trackways, preserved in mudstone, show how animals traveled together or alone, how fast they moved, and whether they lingered in certain places. The world emerges not from a single discovery, but from layers of quiet agreement between many pieces of evidence. This reconstruction is careful by design. Scientists resist the urge to make these animals feel more familiar than they were. Uncertainty is preserved rather than erased. Where the evidence ends, imagination is restrained. The goal is not spectacle, but understanding. Each reconstruction remains open to revision as new discoveries surface. What results is not a vivid movie of the past, but something more subtle and honest, a sense of atmosphere, a feeling for how life moved through space and time. These reconstructions are built to be stable rather than dramatic, acknowledging both what is known and what remains hidden. In this way, lost worlds return not as perfect images, but as living questions grounded in evidence. The Permian rulers are not resurrected in full detail. They are outlined carefully, with attention to structure, environment, and constraint. Their lives are inferred gently, respecting the limits of stone and time. This approach mirrors the nature of deep history itself. Earth does not reveal everything at once. It offers fragments, patterns, and silence. Scientists listen to all three. Through this listening, the ancient world becomes clearer, not as a place of fantasy, but as a real, complex chapter of life that once existed beneath very different skies. By accepting incompleteness, scientists honor the past more faithfully. The Permian rulers are understood not as myths to be filled in boldly, but as real animals whose traces require patience. Their story is rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, until a lost world stands again, quiet, believable, and deeply human in its pursuit of understanding. The Permian rulers feel alien not because they were stranger than other ancient life, but because the bridge that once connected them to the present was completely erased. Extinction did more than remove bodies from the land, it removed continuity. When a lineage ends without descendants, familiarity fades with it. What remains becomes harder to recognize, not biologically, but psychologically. Animals that have living relatives feel easier to understand. Even the most unfamiliar creatures gain context when something similar still breathes today. Dinosaurs benefit from this connection. Birds carry echoes of their form and behavior, offering a living reference that grounds imagination. The Permian rulers left no such trace. When they vanished, every visible reminder vanished with them. There were no survivors to soften the gap between then and now. This total loss reshapes perception. Without modern descendants, the mind has nothing to anchor to. The bodies reconstructed from stone feel incomplete, not because science is lacking, but because intuition has nothing familiar to grasp. A sail rising from a back, a skull shaped for a world that no longer exists, limbs that suggest both reptile and mammal. All of these features float without context. They look assembled rather than grown, as if belonging to fiction instead of history. Extinction also stripped away behavior. How an animal moves, rests, socializes, or raises young often feels more important than how it looks. With no living analogs, these patterns remain inferred rather than observed. Even careful reconstruction leaves space where motion should be. That space is unsettling. It creates the sense that something vital is missing, making the animal feel less real. There is also the weight of scale. The Permian rulers did not disappear one by one through normal evolutionary change. They were erased almost entirely within a narrow window of deep time. This kind of loss does not resemble replacement, it resembles interruption. The mind expects continuity, a handoff from one era to the next. Instead, it finds a clean break. Before them, abundance. After them, absence. The psychological effect of this total loss is subtle but powerful. When something ends without inheritance, it becomes harder to integrate into a larger story. It feels isolated, like a forgotten draft rather than a finished chapter. The brain struggles to place it within a narrative that leads anywhere familiar. Without outcomes we recognize, meaning feels harder to assign. This is why these animals can seem unreal, not because they were implausible, but because they belong to a world that did not seed the present in visible ways. Their success did not lead directly to us. Their dominance did not leave monuments in modern ecosystems. They ruled, then vanished, leaving behind silence rather than lineage. Time deepens this effect. Hundreds of millions of years widen the gap until imagination falters. Landscapes change, climates shift, continents rearrange. Without familiar markers, the Permian world feels detached, floating somewhere beyond intuitive reach. The creatures within it feel more like concepts than organisms, despite the solidity of their bones. Yet this sense of unreality is not truth, it is distance. These animals lived lives as tangible and immediate as any living today. They hunted, rested, competed, and reproduced under skies that were real, on ground that still lies beneath our feet. Their strangeness comes not from their nature, but from our separation from it. When total extinction removes every echo, the past loses texture. That loss does not diminish what existed, it only limits what can be easily felt. The alien quality of the Permian rulers is a reflection of how thoroughly Earth can erase its own history, leaving only outlines where once there was motion. In this way, their unreality teaches something essential. Familiarity is fragile. It depends on survival, continuity, and memory. When those vanish together, even the most dominant life can become ghost-like. The Permian rulers feel alien because nothing carried their image forward, not even faintly. Their bones remind us that reality does not require recognition to be real. These creatures lived fully in their moment, shaped by a world that no longer exists. The strangeness we feel is not theirs. It belongs to the silence left behind when an entire age disappears, leaving us to encounter it only through stone and imagination, long after the living context has been lost. Across the long history of Earth, a quiet pattern repeats itself, slow enough to be invisible from within a single lifetime, yet unmistakable when viewed across deep time. It begins with rise, unfolds into dominance, breaks into collapse, and settles into renewal. This rhythm does not belong to one group or one age, it belongs to the planet itself. Every ruling age starts the same way, though it rarely feels dramatic at the time. After upheaval or absence, life begins cautiously. Small forms appear first, adaptable and unassuming. They test the world as it is, not as it once was. Over generations, certain shapes prove reliable, certain strategies hold. From this patient exploration, larger patterns emerge. The rise is never rushed, it is earned through endurance. As environments stabilize, dominance slowly takes shape. A few lineages find ways to thrive consistently within the boundaries of their world. Their bodies align with climate, landscape, and available energy. Their behaviors fit the rhythms of their ecosystems. Over time, these successful forms expand, spreading across continents, filling niches, and shaping the lives around them. Dominance settles in not as conquest, but as presence. Once established, a ruling age can last far longer than intuition expects. Millions of years pass under the guidance of the same dominant forms. Ecosystems adjust to their influence. Prey evolves in response. Landscapes bear their marks through movement, grazing, and migration. To those living within it, this dominance would feel permanent. Stability becomes familiar. Change feels distant. Yet no dominance exists outside of change. The same forces that once favored success continue to work quietly in the background. Climates drift, atmospheres shift, continents rearrange. Volcanic and chemical processes alter the rules slowly but persistently. As conditions move away from what once worked, dominance grows heavy. Adaptations that were once advantages become commitments that cannot easily be undone. Collapse rarely arrives with a single cause. It emerges from accumulation. Stress builds in ecosystems. Food webs tighten, flexibility narrows. When limits are finally crossed, loss accelerates. Ruling forms disappear not because they failed suddenly, but because the world they mastered no longer exists. The collapse feels dramatic in retrospect, yet it unfolds through many small failures rather than one decisive moment. After collapse, the planet enters a quieter phase. Renewal does not mean replacement, it means recovery. Life continues at reduced scale, rebuilding from fragments. Ecosystems simplify before they grow complex again. The land takes time to regain balance. During this interval, the absence of rulers matters. It creates space for new strategies, new combinations, and new solutions to arise without immediate competition from giants. Renewal is cautious. It favors resilience over specialization, breadth over refinement. Only once stability returns does the cycle begin again. From small beginnings, new dominant forms eventually rise, shaped by lessons learned through survival rather than memory. They do not inherit power from previous rulers, they earn it within a changed world. This pattern has repeated many times. Long before the Permian rulers, earlier dominant ages followed the same arc. After them, dinosaurs would rise into dominance, persist, and eventually fall, giving way to mammals in another slow turn of the same cycle. Each iteration is unique in detail, yet similar in structure. What this reveals is not cruelty or randomness, but persistence. Earth does not seek permanence in form, it seeks continuity in process. The planet experiments, selects, and resets, not out of intention, but as a natural result of physical and biological interaction across immense spans of time. Understanding this cycle softens the sense of loss tied to any single extinction. Collapse is not erasure without meaning. It is transition built into the architecture of life. Renewal does not erase what came before. It builds upon its traces, sometimes visibly, sometimes quietly. The Permian rulers fit precisely within this rhythm. Their rise was patient, their dominance long and stable, their collapse complete, and their legacy woven invisibly into what followed. They were not anomalies, they were participants in a pattern far larger than themselves. Seen from this perspective, Earth's history becomes less a series of accidents and more a continuous unfolding. Rulers come and go, worlds change, life adapts and begins again. The cycle does not hurry and it does not stop. It moves forward gently, carrying each age into the next, leaving behind lessons written in stone, waiting to be read by those willing to look slowly. The fall of the Permian rulers carries lessons that are easy to miss when viewed from the scale of a single lifetime. Their dominance was not brief or unstable. It lasted millions of years, long enough to feel permanent within the rhythm of the world. Entire ecosystems formed around their presence, yet even this deep stability could not shield them from change. Their story reminds us that endurance and dominance are not the same as protection. For much of their reign, the Permian rulers were perfectly suited to their environment. Their bodies matched the climate, their strategies aligned with available resources. Their ecosystems operated within narrow but reliable boundaries. From within that world, survival seemed assured. Nothing about their success suggested vulnerability. This is how stability works. It creates familiarity so convincing that fragility becomes invisible. The danger of long stability is not stagnation, but dependence. When systems operate within consistent limits for extended periods, life becomes finely tuned to those conditions. Efficiency replaces flexibility. Specialization deepens. These traits are powerful under the right circumstances, but they carry hidden cost. When the world shifts beyond those limits, there is little room to adjust. The Permian rulers did not fail because they were poorly adapted. They failed because they were too well adapted to a version of Earth that no longer existed. As temperatures rose, oxygen fell, and food webs fractured, the traits that once ensured success began to constrain survival. Size demanded energy, specialization limited options. Dominance required stability that had quietly eroded. Their fall also teaches that change does not require intent or urgency. The planet does not signal transitions in advance. It shifts gradually, driven by processes indifferent to the lives built upon them. By the time change becomes obvious, options may already be limited. The Permian world did not collapse because of a single event, but because many pressures aligned in the same direction without pause. This lesson extends beyond any single age. Throughout Earth's history, dominant life forms have risen, thrived, and fallen not through weakness, but through inflexibility in the face of new conditions. The pattern repeats because it is rooted in how systems respond to stability and disruption. Stability enables complexity, but it also encourages reliance on conditions that cannot be guaranteed forever. Change always comes, even when it moves slowly. Continents drift, atmospheres evolve, climates shift. These changes may take millions of years, but life experiences them as cumulative pressure rather than isolated events. Those able to absorb variation survive. Those optimized for a narrow set of conditions struggle as boundaries are crossed. The Permian rulers offer a long view of this truth. Their reign was not a mistake. It was a success story on its own terms. They shaped Earth profoundly, leaving marks in biology that still echo today. Their extinction does not diminish their achievement. It completes it. Lessons written in millions of years do not speak loudly. They are found in patterns rather than proclamations. They show that survival favors those who remain adaptable, not merely strong. That resilience often emerges from moderation rather than dominance. That systems must be able to bend if they are to endure. There is also humility in this story. The Permian rulers remind us that no species, no matter how successful, exists outside Earth's larger rhythms. Life does not control the planet, it responds to it. Dominance is a temporary alignment between form and environment, not a permanent state. When viewed gently, this lesson is not one of warning, but of perspective. Change is not an enemy, it is a constant. Life continues because it learns, forgets, and learns again under new conditions. The fall of one ruling age creates the space for the next, carrying forward only what remains useful. The Permian rulers fell not because they failed to survive their moment, but because their moment ended. In their absence, Earth continued its long conversation with life, exploring new forms and balances. Their story teaches us that survival is not about holding ground forever, but about moving with a planet that never stops changing, writing its lessons slowly across deep time. After the long reign of the Permian rulers came a stillness unlike anything before it. The land remained shaped by rivers and wind, the skies still carried clouds, and the seasons continued their slow turning. Yet the guiding presence that had once defined life on Earth was gone. The planet entered a phase without rulers, not because life had ended, but because dominance had withdrawn. This absence carried a different kind of quiet. It was not emptiness, but restraint. Ecosystems still functioned, though their rhythms softened. Without large predators shaping movement and behavior, life settled into patterns that felt tentative. Prey animals spread cautiously, no longer directed by fear or pursuit, yet not fully free either. The memory of danger lingered in the structure of bodies and habits, even as the danger itself faded. Silence settled into ecosystems in subtle ways. Footprints became smaller, paths less defined. The great movements that once crossed landscapes faded into localized activity. Rivers no longer drew the same watchful attention along their banks. Open plains stretched wider, their spaces held by fewer eyes. This was not decline, but recalibration. In this quieter world, smaller forms found room to persist. Insects, small vertebrates, and resilient plants became the primary architects of survival. Their lives were brief, but their strategies effective. They filled niches left open by the absence of large competitors. Reproduction favored those able to respond quickly to changing conditions. Life leaned toward abundance at small scales rather than dominance at large ones. The lack of rulers created space in ways that could not have existed before. Without the constant pressure of apex predators, energy flowed differently through ecosystems. Some populations expanded briefly, others contracted, but overall, the land explored new balances. These experiments did not aim at grandeur, they aimed at survival. Flexibility became more valuable than strength. Diversity grew quietly among forms that required little support. Plants played a central role in this pause. As foundational organisms, they stabilized soil, softened climates at ground level, and provided structure for returning complexity. Forests and open vegetation spread cautiously, adapting to altered temperatures and moisture patterns. These plant communities were not lush in the old sense, but they were resilient, built to endure variation rather than rely on stability. This period also allowed interactions to reset. Relationships between species formed without the constraints of established dominance hierarchies. Mutualism, opportunism, and generalist strategies flourished. Life reorganized itself around cooperation with conditions rather than competition for control. The planet encouraged systems that could absorb change without collapsing. The quiet that followed was essential, though it might appear uneventful in comparison to the ages that came before and after. Recovery is rarely dramatic. It unfolds through countless small successes that do not announce themselves. Over time, these successes accumulate, rebuilding the scaffolding that supports larger forms. This pause did not last forever, but it lasted long enough to matter. It provided a buffer against repetition of the same vulnerabilities that had led to collapse. By delaying the rise of new rulers, Earth ensured that future dominance would emerge under different constraints, shaped by lessons learned through loss rather than inherited by habit. In the fossil record, this interval is marked by simplicity and patience. Layers record life returning carefully, without sudden surges in size or specialization. There is no rush toward complexity. The planet breathes slowly, allowing connections to form before weight is added above them. This quiet was not a void. It was preparation. In the absence of rulers, the earth did not stand still. It reorganized, tested, and healed. The pause between ages was as necessary as the ages themselves. It ensured that when the next ruling group eventually emerged, the world beneath them would be capable of supporting their presence. As this quiet stretched on, life grew steadier. Ecosystems strengthened, food webs lengthened, the conditions for dominance began to reappear, not suddenly, but inevitably. The pause began to feel less like waiting and more like readiness. Thus, the quiet that followed the Permian collapse was not an ending. It was a breath taken by a planet that had endured profound loss and was preparing, slowly and patiently, for whatever life would become next. When dinosaurs first appeared, the world they stepped into bore little resemblance to the landscapes that would later define them. This was not a realm waiting for conquerors. It was a recovering planet, still shaped by restraint and memory. The silence left behind by earlier rulers had not fully lifted. Ecosystems were present, but cautious, their structures rebuilt slowly from smaller, sturdier pieces. These early dinosaurs did not arrive as dominant forces. They were modest in size, lightly built, and easily overlooked among the many creatures already navigating the recovering land. Other animals still held ground, filling roles as herbivores, scavengers, and small predators. The dinosaurs were simply part of the mixture, not yet distinct in power or presence. Their success would not come from overwhelming strength, but from fitting into a world still healing. The planet at this time favored flexibility above all else. Food webs remained thin compared to earlier ages. Resources fluctuated, climate shifts lingered. In such conditions, the ability to survive uncertainty mattered more than the ability to control others. Dinosaurs possessed traits that aligned quietly with these needs. Their posture allowed efficient movement. Their metabolism supported sustained activity without excessive demand. Their growth patterns favored resilience rather than excess. They moved through environments shaped by gaps rather than barriers. With many large predators absent, pressure at the top remained light. This did not create safety, but opportunity. Dinosaurs could expand cautiously, exploring niches without immediate competition from entrenched rulers. Their rise was shaped by access rather than conquest. Timing played a central role in this process. Had dinosaurs appeared earlier, they may have been constrained by dominant predators optimized for control. Had they emerged later, other groups might have already filled the available spaces. Their entrance coincided with a moment when ecosystems were open but stabilizing, offering room to grow without forcing immediate specialization. This timing allowed dinosaurs to diversify gradually. Some adapted toward speed, others toward size, still others toward herbivory. Each experiment unfolded in parallel, supported by a planet that was once again capable of sustaining complexity but not yet committed to any single path. Dinosaurs did not replace existing life so much as integrate into it, layer by layer. Their rise lacked spectacle at first. There was no sudden surge, no immediate transformation of landscapes. Instead, dinosaurs became more common, more varied, more reliable. Over long spans of time, their presence increased not because they displaced others aggressively, but because they endured consistently. They survived fluctuations that challenged more specialized forms. They recovered from setbacks without collapsing. This endurance gradually shifted balance. As ecosystems grew more robust, the advantages of dinosaur biology became clearer. Their efficient movement supported wider ranges. Their respiratory systems handled varied conditions. Their reproductive strategies allowed steady population growth. These traits, honed quietly during recovery, began to matter more as the planet regained strength. Importantly, dinosaurs did not inherit dominance. They earned it through patience. Their rise demonstrates that success in deep time often belongs to those who arrive at the right moment with the right balance of traits, rather than those who arrive with the greatest force. Strength without support fades quickly. Adaptation aligned with timing endures. As millions of years passed, the world continued to change alongside them. Forests thickened, food webs lengthened, climatic patterns settled into rhythms that favored larger, more complex animals. In this strengthening world, dinosaurs expanded naturally into roles that had once been held by others long vanished. Their dominance emerged gradually, almost unnoticed until it was firmly established. This kind of rise differs from the dramatic narratives often associated with dinosaurs. They were not born rulers. They became rulers because the world changed in ways that suited them, and because they were already present, already adapted, already persistent. Their success was not inevitable, it was contingent. The dinosaurs entered a changed world, shaped by loss, recovery, and patience. Their rise reflects the quiet power of alignment between life and environment. It is a reminder that history often turns not on sudden triumphs, but on steady presence during moments of transition. In a planet still learning how to be whole again, dinosaurs found their opening, and they stepped into it without hurry. The story of the Permian rulers does not end with their disappearance from the fossil record. It settles beneath us, layered quietly into the ground that still carries our weight. These creatures ruled Earth for spans of time that far exceed all of human history combined. Their reign was not brief, experimental, or uncertain. It was long, stable, and complete, measured not in centuries or millennia, but in deep stretches of planetary time. It is difficult to truly grasp that length. Human civilization occupies only the thinnest surface layer of Earth's memory. Written language, cities, agriculture, and industry represent a moment compared to the millions of years during which the Permian rulers shaped landscapes, ecosystems, and evolutionary pathways. Forests grew and vanished under their watch. Rivers changed course, while their footprints pressed into soft ground. Continents shifted slowly, beneath skies filled with their presence. Their world feels distant because nothing living carries their shape forward. We cannot point to a modern animal and say, this is what they became. The connection is not visual or direct. Yet distance does not mean disconnection. The world we inhabit was built through layers of previous worlds, each one influencing the next. The conditions that allowed mammals, dinosaurs, birds, and eventually humans to exist were prepared through countless earlier experiments. The Permian rulers were among the most important of those experiments. They shaped Earth not simply by existing, but by dominating fully. Their presence structured food webs, influenced plant evolution, and tested biological strategies under extreme conditions. The traits they refined, endurance, efficiency, differentiated teeth, upright movement, did not vanish with them. These ideas in biology resurfaced later, adapted to new circumstances, carried forward by entirely different creatures. The past does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes through structure and function. Beneath our feet lies this forgotten age, pressed into stone layers that form the foundation of continents. Cities now stand atop floodplains, once crossed by sail-backed hunters. Roads cut through rock, formed from sediments laid down during their reign. The quiet solidity of the ground holds memories far older than anything written or spoken. Every step rests upon a world that once lived very differently. Calling their time a prelude diminishes what it was. A prelude implies inevitability, as if their purpose were only to prepare the stage for something better known. But their age was not waiting for dinosaurs, mammals, or humans. It was complete on its own terms. Life during the Permian reached complexity, stability, and dominance unmatched until long after its end. Their reign stands as one of Earth's great chapters, not a rough draft. The loss of this world reminds us how thoroughly Earth can transform itself. Entire ruling systems can vanish without leaving living reminders. Familiarity is fragile. Memory depends on survival. When survival ends completely, only stone remains to carry the story forward. The planet does not hold on to its past through nostalgia. It holds it through layers, pressure, and time. Earth remembers even when we do not. It remembers in the chemistry of rocks, in the arrangement of fossils, in the slow cycles that continue regardless of who dominates at any given moment. The forgetting belongs to us, not the planet. Our attention moves quickly, drawn to what still breathes and moves around us. Yet beneath that immediacy lies a deeper continuity. The Permian rulers ruled longer than humanity has existed, longer than all recorded history combined. Their absence today does not erase their importance, it sharpens it. Their complete disappearance shows how absolute change can be and how little permanence dominance truly offers. It also shows how resilient life itself remains, continuing through loss, rebuilding from fragments, carrying forward what works. In remembering these forgotten rulers, we do not uncover a curiosity at the edge of Earth's story. We uncover one of its central pillars. Their world feels distant because time has done its work thoroughly, but distance does not lessen significance. The ground beneath us is layered with rains that once felt just as permanent as our own moment does now. Their story invites a slower way of seeing Earth, one that measures importance not by familiarity, but by duration and influence. In that deeper view, the Permian rulers are not strange anomalies lost to time. They are reminders that Earth has lived many full lives before ours, each one real, complete, and worthy of remembrance, even when silence is all that remains.